Have you let it get you yet? People there are saying, how bad's it gonna get? And I've been calling to the sky, please don't let more bullets fly. Have you heard the talk of the cities and the towns? There's a fear from the inside and the toil all around. And I've been hoping for my help, find the cure to come and sail. In these times of struggle, you can hear the children cry. Hello, pa, I'm weary.
Good evening, good people. It's Sunday, March 2nd. I'm Brad Hartley, and this is Critical Mass TV. Social critical mass is the fewest people required to sustain meaningful change in the world. As I look around, I grudgingly have to admit that the groups with the most success sustaining change of late are the super rich and the global corporations. Unfortunately, change for them means more and more efficient means of funneling the world's wealth into their private coffers. This is a very top-down approach, and one can link most of the maladies that plague human society to this one ever-present constant. The greatest achievements of working people, on the other hand, have always resulted from grassroots critical mass. These movements have sought to extend human rights, dignity, and justice to ever-increasing numbers of the world's people. Our mission here at Critical Mass TV is to analyze the tricks and machinations of the first group so the bottom-up actions and strategies of the second can be most effective. Our best chance is to be activists and lead, not to be reactivists and simply bob and weave everything that the greed cult throws at us. Some mixed mental arts for our intellectual self-defense. Continuing on that theme, I would like to introduce tonight's guests. Both men are local activists and involved with the global climate change awareness movement, specifically 350vermont.org. Please welcome Arthur Hynes and Andy Simon. We are going to begin by talking about Alberta tar sands, fossil fuels, and the impacts of climate change, but it doesn't end there. Being that solutions to problems are equally as important as dissecting the problems themselves, we will discuss strategies of action and resistance and try to answer the question, so what the hell can we do about it? Welcome Arthur and Andy. Nice to have you here. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Nice to be here, Brad.
Can you get us started, Andy, and tell us what fossil fuels have to do with our crazy climate?
Well, I did want to start by noting that you mentioned resistance, and we're going to talk about resistance later on. We were talking earlier about the fact that 300 people got arrested at the White House today, young people who were down protesting the Keystone XL and the possibility that Obama might approve the Keystone XL pipeline. So, you know, people are fighting and resisting all the time. It's really just noticeable when people get themselves in front of the White House, get themselves in a situation where they could get arrested, and I think we should applaud them for that.
I think we should too. Oh yeah, I'm proud of them. Yeah, unbelievably proud.
So the whole question of fossil fuels and climate change is much too big a one for us to talk about in a 1 hour show or a 5 hour show or a 6 hour show. But you know what we've been working on, and you said we're part of the climate change consciousness movement. I think we're part of the climate justice movement. And I don't know how you would define it, Arthur, but
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I think that what we are doing is not just bringing awareness of the impact of fossil fuels or the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but really just how all of these pieces flow together, how the fact that the climate is being dismembered by corporations and by human activities, mostly by greed, is ties into all of the other social justice movements that are happening around the world. You know, when I see people taking over Tahrir Square in Cairo, you know, I feel like there's a kinship between those people who are fighting for basic human rights, for a democratic society, and the people here who are getting arrested in front of the White House.
I agree.
So climate change, fossil fuels, what we've been working on in 350 Vermont, and 350 is of course named after the parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is sustainable for human life on the Earth. We're at 400 and climbing now. So we're past that limit. We're past the point of no return in terms of impact on the climate.
350, I think we passed that in 1988. Is that correct?
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while. So we have to start, you know, it's critical that all of us, you know, the critical mass that has to happen now is that all of us who are aware of what's going on with fossil fuels be vigilant and active in fighting for to push our country in the right direction, to push the world in the right direction. So bringing that down to a local level, you know, we have been working in 350 Vermont. We've been working very hard to raise awareness about the issues of tar sands in Western Canada, and how that fits into the whole fossil fuel picture, because there's a very intimate connection between what's going on in Western Canada, what's going on with the Keystone XL pipeline, and what is threatening to happen here in Vermont with the Portland-Montreal pipeline, which runs through Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and is currently bringing fuel from Portland, and has been for over 70 years, Portland to Montreal. But the proposal or the idea of the oil companies is to turn that around and bring fuel from Montreal to the port of South Portland,
Which is tar sands
and
oil, basically coming.
Which would be largely in the total picture of things, tar sands oil coming from Western Canada, soon to arrive in Montreal, because those pipelines that are moving to Montreal are, there's a decision that's coming from the National Energy Board in Canada any day now that will approve, is expected to approve the flow of tar sands oil as far as Montreal.
That's the Line 9
Line 9, exactly.
reversal also, or
Right.
something. Okay.
Yes. Line 9 that is an Enbridge pipeline that comes from Alberta, from Sarnia, Ontario to Montreal. and
Right.
ultimately from Alberta. So the plan of the oil companies is seems to be to then move some of that tar sands oil, or a lot of it, through New England to get to Portland, Maine. They've been very unsuccessful at getting the quantities of crude tar sands products out that they want to get out.
Out, you mean getting it to the coast where it can be exported to then be refined
Right.
offshore,
Where
elsewhere,
it-
somewhere.
You know, there are a variety of ways that it comes out, but some of it can get refined before it goes offshore. Some of it can
course.
get partially refined. A lot of it gets just diluted with liquefied natural gas, and enough so that it's got the viscosity that it needs to actually move through the pipeline, because the way it comes out of the ground is this really thick, gooey bitumen, and looks like asphalt.
Right.
Looks like soft asphalt.
Right, can't be pumped through a pipeline.
Right. So we're talking about a product that has been in the ground and unusable for many, many, many years, and after it was discovered. But then, as the price of oil went up, and as technology improved, and as the basic ruthlessness of the oil companies increased, it starts to be profitable.
Right.
And
But there's an interesting aspect to this, and just reading an article that basically about the distribution of it, or the need to move high volumes through pipelines, to the coast and to the refineries, that if they can't move a high enough volume, if the Keystone, if Obama does nix the Keystone pipeline, and if these other pipelines are blocked, then it becomes much more expensive and and much less profitable, and getting down to the point where it's maybe already we're seeing it. A lot of the investment companies, investment firms are noting that sort of to the point where it might not be profitable, that maybe these are not good investments, and so that's where the resistance comes in, and the more trouble they have putting pipelines through and getting these projects through, the more it's going to cost them, and the more pressure it's going to put on. And of course, they only have they're planning to, I think, triple the production in the future, is what they see the map, and it's vast as it is, and they're greatly expand it. So
But if you can slow down the transport of the product coming out of Alberta, it becomes less and less economically viable. If they can't make a certain margin, then the investment will go away, and it will, by economic rules, it will stay in the ground at a much greater degree.
And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that a large portion of this, I don't know the percentages, for export.
Sure.
All, what they say is, make the United States energy independent, we won't have to depend on Middle East oil, but a lot of this is for export. And so, again, it's like all, when you have pipelines, whoever is anywhere near the pipelines is getting all the risk and really no profit
Right.
at all, or no benefit.
And when you were talking, Brad, you were saying, so what is the connection between fossil fuels and climate change? And the problem with this particular kind of energy, with this particular kind of oil, and it's the same problem that is a problem with frack gas. It's a problem with deep water drilling for oil. It's the same problem with nuclear energy. All these are forms of extreme energy. There's no easy, any access to easy reserves of energy is drying up.
Right.
And so what it takes in these forms of extreme energy to extract them, to refine them, to ship them, is increasing amounts of carbon pollution in the atmosphere, increasing amounts of greenhouse gases, increasing injustice to the people whose land these resources are found on, increasing impact to the earth, just in terms of what has to be done to the earth. I mean, when you drill a mile under the ocean, it does have an impact, whether it, like the BP spill, whether it gushes out into the ocean or not. There's an impact that happens when an oil rig is out there drilling a mile into the earth under the ocean.
Sure.
And there's a huge impact in tar sands, because in order to get at this stuff, they basically have to destroy everything that's on top of the earth, and then depending on how they're doing it, they either have to strip the boreal forest right off and start strip mining the whole.
Which is what it looks like on the aerial.
It looks like a
photos
moonscape up there.
Yeah.
Or
Hiroshima, as
Right.
Neil Young said.
right.
Yeah.
It's
You got
true.
a lot of flack, but you look at pictures of Hiroshima, and
It's
aside
utter
from the people
devastation.
killed at Hiroshima, just the picture of the landscape, it's
Right.
It's very similar.
Strip mining is very, very harmful on your local ecology.
And even when they're not strip mining tar sands, they are they're doing essentially a fracking procedure that's called in situ mining, where they have to go deep down into the earth with very hot steam under pressure that requires a huge amount of energy just to generate the steam. Shoot it down into the earth to liquefy the petroleum products, and then drain off those petroleum products to be taken off and refined somewhere else.
So then it's pumped out after it's loosened up with the steam.
Right.
Kind of that's the
Right.
technology.
It actually is, well, gravity fed, because they have a pipe that goes down. But
Okay.
it's and the destruction that happens in primarily First Nations land out in Alberta is tremendous. They've absolutely desecrated the hunting and fishing areas. They've poisoned the water. There are huge tailing ponds that we'll see pictures of that are leaking at tremendous rates into the Athabasca River, the third largest watershed in the world.
Right.
And, the absolute destruction of the land and of the people who are living on that land right now is already horrific. We can't stop that immediately. It's already happened.
They've been
And
working at it for decades, haven't they?
They've
Already
been
in
working
Alberta?
at it. They've been working at it for at least 15 years.
15 years.
And they've been working on keeping it quiet for that whole period
That whole
of
time.
time. And really, people in Canada have been aware of this going on. But people in the United States, just since 2011, really have started to be aware of tar sands and what it really means, what the impact on the climate is, what the impact on the people who are in the so-called sacrifice zone is,
Right.
and what the impact on the environment here, or any of the places where it's being transported, when not just if, but when there is a spill.
And, getting back to climate justice, that has to do with looking at the whole picture of everyone who's affected, and the first people always affected are poor and, indigenous and or marginalized people. And it's,
People of
very,
color.
very true, perfect example of in Alberta, directly downriver from the tar sands development. The Athabasca tribe has always depended on the fishing and hunting and living off the land, and now those, the water is poisoned, the fish are poisoned.
So
and
some of the
they're-
people that are least responsible for the technology and for the destruction are some of the people that are mostly the most affected by the kind of insane technology, I would call it. And with like global ice sheets melting and ocean levels rising and the oceans becoming more and more acidic, which are all also tied to burning fossil fuels, in a crazy rampant way, that affects all these low-lying island nations in Bangladesh and people that live at sea level. A lot of the world's people are not living in over-the-top mansions on the coast like people do here in the United States. It's a lot of subsistence fishing villages by people by the millions, hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
So, and they're-
Should we,
We should
I
look
think
at
we
some of those
should.
slides. Yeah.
Hey, Jim, could we start on the slides?
tar sand slides?
So as we,
Yeah, we do have some images just of tar sands mining. Well, this is the slide we're looking at now is tar sand spill last year in Mayflower, Arkansas. Actually, this has very strong similarities to the pipeline. This was a pipeline in Arkansas. It was a pipeline very similar to the one that goes through Vermont and New England. Similar in ownership because it's ExxonMobil that owns it. Similar in age, and the fact that just a couple of years before this spill happened, the pipeline was reversed and tar sands, so that tar sands could be moved through it. This is one of the areas where the devastation is most obvious. It's tar sands crude flowing down people's driveways in a suburban neighborhood outside of Little Rock. Maybe we go to the next one. This is just a pie chart of the ownership of Portland-Montreal Pipeline. There's sort of a pretense that it's a small, mom and pop operation operated out of Portland. It's actually owned by ExxonMobil and vastly majority owned by ExxonMobil Corporation.
Jim, are you able to go back to the beginning of the slides? No, that's not the first one. That's tar sands.
We can roll with it, with whatever we got, or
Okay.
are we just skipping it?
No,
Okay, right, there was.
Yeah.
there
Right,
was-
now this is an image of, sort of a before and after picture of the boreal forest on one side and the Athabasca River, and, what happens to that forest in order to do tar sand strip mining. It's a huge area. People compare it to various states and countries, but it's something like the sacrifice zone that they're talking about is the size of the state of Florida or Great Britain, or depending on who you're talking to. Let's keep going. This is just another image of tar sand strip mining. The scale is hard to get your mind around, how giant this is. I think there might be a dump truck in that picture. They have the largest dump trucks in the world that are doing this kind
Even
of
the
mining.
excavator is one
The
of the largest models
Right.
that exists.
And it's the largest industrial project in the world,
Right.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Which you can see. You
Yeah.
can see the tailing ponds from space.
So many industries and people also get trapped up in this cycle of excavation. It's not just simply a bunch of oil companies. It really draws in a lot of.
well, yeah. It's
know.
like, it's a boom town in Fort McMurray, Alberta, and,
Right.
people are going there for the big wages that they can get, but it also is totally destructive to the people who are doing it,
Right, it's
who are-
our simple-minded economic equations where all the costs, all the meaningful costs, all the destruction are externalized.
Right.
Nobody's really paying those costs, and the companies can make money off of their little narrow economic formula, and somebody else has to pay all the real costs.
Let's keep going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
next slide.
This is just a shot of bitumen when it comes out of the ground, when it's just dug before they start trying to dilute it and put it through pipelines, just a sense of how thick it really is.
You can imagine the energy it takes to turn that into a meaningful, refined product.
And one of the issues with putting it through pipelines is, as Andy mentioned, it has to be diluted. And you see, you can't pump it as it is through a pipeline. It has to be diluted and pumped under pressure, which also adds heat as an element. So it's been described as liquid sandpaper. So it's very abrasive material pumped, under pressure and heated through old pipelines.
Right,
And,
through vintage pipelines,
what do you think's going to happen?
not designed for that. Go ahead, Jim.
This is an image of the tailing ponds next to the Athabasca River. Athabasca is a huge river that leads into the Mackenzie River that flows into the Arctic Ocean. And when they fill these waters that they need to actually do the refining with the extraction and the refining, this water becomes tremendously toxic with a variety of different carcinogens, and it sits in these giant ponds that are leaking into the Athabasca River. So it's already a tremendous ecological catastrophe. If the berms that are holding back the tailings ponds breach, then it's going to be an even huger absolute
Well, on
mess.
it's millions of liters a day, isn't it?
11 million liters a day. is
11
what they
million
estimate.
liters a day are leaking
Directly into the
constantly,
river.
Directly
Right.
into the river. These are unlined ponds, and just the nature of the soil is leaking, just flowing right into the river, millions of liters a day.
All right, let's go on.
Go ahead, Jim.
This is just one shot of the destruction that's happening in the Athabasca River. We can go on.
I saw them like firing cannons across some of these tailings ponds, like trying to keep migrating waterfowl from
Yeah.
landing.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
So this is just a shot of just a map of the area, the so-called sacrifice zone for tar sands. The red is what they're actually mining now, and the outlined area is what they're hoping to dig up. Let's go on. This is one schematic of one of the pipelines, the one that goes from Alberta through the Midwest and on through New England on the Portland-Montreal pipeline. This is one of the ways that they are hoping to get tar sands products out and in our backyard.
They're going almost every direction but north, right? Trying to, and I mean,
No,
not
they're going north too.
going north too.
They're talking about going north to the Arctic Ocean. This is the Missisquoi River in Vermont. This shot of the River Road covered bridge is just within spitting distance of where the pipeline goes under the Missisquoi River.
The Portland-Montreal one.
Right,
Okay.
the Portland-Montreal pipeline. So you imagine what that could be. The pipeline is supposed to be subterranean throughout its route. We did a brief survey a couple of years ago and found in several places found the pipeline exposed in brooks after.
Now that's
tropical
you,
storm.
isn't it,
That's
Andy?
me
Okay.
standing there pointing at those pipelines and saying, what the heck? Why are
Right.
these, exposed to these giant boulders that could come washing down this stream and
It's hard to believe that's not breached already with just the
Well,
that one boulder pressed up
I mean,
against
everybody in Vermont got a good taste of
maintenance.
the power of water.
Right.
you
Oh,
know,
that was
during
this is
Irene.
Irene,
Seems
post
to be
Irene.
taken out and
Irene,
just
yeah.
Little brooks turning into roaring rivers that throw boulders around like nothing. So
And this is called Roaring Brook, so
yeah.
let's go on. There. So this is a shot of the rail disaster in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec last summer. 48 people killed in downtown Lac-Mégantic on a Saturday night. It was horrific, and it wasn't tar sands oil. It was light crude, but it's tremendously dangerous stuff to transport, whether you're transporting it on a rail car or transporting it in a pipeline. The oil companies jump on these kinds of tragedies and use them to try to show that pipelines are so much safer.
to kind of rationalize the use of pipelines, right?
The bottom line is that they do not care about our safety. So, for them to get self-righteous about it is
Because there's
shame.
plenty examples of big burning ruptured pipelines also. I mean, you can
Right.
find many, many images.
Yeah,
This is a particularly tragic accident.
yeah. Let's go on, Jim. This is actually a shot in the Kalamazoo River in 2010 of a Canada goose trying to fly out of an oil slick. 2010, the Enbridge pipeline that cuts through Michigan ruptured. 1 million gallons of oil into Talmadge Brook and the Kalamazoo River. 40 miles of the river contaminated, and they're still trying to clean it up.
And that was tar sands.
That was tar sands oil.
And they're trying to get to the refineries in Chicago with this pipeline, or they are refining there.
They're trying to get to, they're actually, no, this is past Chicago. This is east of Chicago. So it's
Right.
flowing east to, there's a refinery in Sarnia, Ontario.
Okay.
And there's a big storage area in Sarnia, Ontario, until they can get it further on. And,
Right.
further on is Montreal and points east.
And at the end of a pipeline, it gets loaded into rail cars and keeps moving.
Well, ships, yeah.
Right
Or
now,
ships.
there's ships on the Great Lakes. There's ships on the St. Lawrence. There are rail cars. They're trying to get it out any way they can.
Right.
And safety be damned. This is just a shot of the Lake Memphremagog watershed. The Portland-Montreal pipeline cuts right through this huge watershed, this area that's got major water resources and a lot of almost innumerable small brooks and streams the Connecticut River, the Clyde River, the Barton River, the Black River, the Missisquoi that we saw before, Crystal Lake, Lake Willoughby, all of these things that would be absolutely susceptible to being ruined by tar sands.
Is there any estimation of the number of creeks and streams and rivers that the Portland-Montreal pipeline crosses just in the Northeast Kingdom? Is there a rough number?
Well, they say in Vermont that there are 15, they detail
Rivers.
15 different rivers and lakes, but it's almost impossible to really number all of the different creeks because there's so many of them. I mean,
Right.
You see it on this map.
Well, and the marshes and
that's
and
just-
bogs,
Right.
and there's crossing water in many places. The 15 would just be the sort of the major rivers and major bodies
Yeah.
of water that.
And very difficult, as you found out, to inspect those after a natural disaster, or even just year to year, day to day.
Right.
It's really tough to inspect a buried system, even where it's exposed.
So let's go on, Jim. What has happened is that a resistance movement has happened on many, many fronts and in many, many places throughout the world. This is just some images that we'll see of resistance to fossil fuel extraction and transport. This is a anti-fracking demonstration. I don't even know where it is, in New York City?
That was in New York City.
Yeah.
Jim, can you come back to us for a minute there, sir? So now we're going to sort of lead into the second half of the show here tonight. I think at least to some extent, people are familiar with some of the issues as far as the Keystone XL goes, and with fossil fuels, at least briefly. We were going to sort of try to work on answering the question to the best of our ability. Is the question rhetorically is, what the heck do we do about it? And there was a very interesting article, I think forwarded to me by you guys. The article's by Naomi Klein. It has to do with a gentleman named Brad Werner, who is a professor at UC San Diego, and he's a complex systems researcher and a geophysicist. So at the fall meeting of the American Geophysical Union, his session was entitled, "Is Earth Fucked?" Which I thought was pretty funny. The dynamical futility of global environmental management and possibilities for sustainability via direct action activism. So there were a couple of very prominent. I think James Cameron was a speaker, and he was talking about his deep sea submersible trips, and this talk right here got more publicity and a lot more buzz than anything else going on. There's 24,000 scientists, I think, at the fall meeting of the Geophysical Union. So a reporter asked Brad Werner after his session, basically to answering the question, Brad, are we fucked? And he says, if we continue going the way we are, more or less we are. But his points are this: global capitalism has made the depletion of resources so rapid, convenient, and barrier-free that the Earth-human systems, he calls them, are becoming dangerously unstable in response. The one dynamic in the model, he points out, though, offers a lot of hope, and Werner terms it resistance. Movements of groups of people who adopt a certain set of dynamics that does not fit within the capitalist culture is how he defines resistance, including environmental direct action, resistance taken from outside the dominant culture, as in protests, blockades, and sabotage by indigenous peoples, workers, anarchists, and other activist groups. So he's not necessarily, trying to call for us these actions. As a scientist, he's looking at, or he was observing, that mass uprisings of people from the abolition movement, the civil rights movement, or a movement like Occupy Wall Street, represent the likeliest form of friction to slow down an economic machine that is careening out of control. Past movements have had tremendous influence on how the dominant culture has evolved. And his summary of the problem is it's not a matter of opinion, but it really is a geophysics problem. So he in this talk is giving a scientific basis for resistance. So that's just very interesting. Jim, we have a couple of videos that we put together or that we collected from the internet about civil disobedience and resistance movements. Could you show those videos for us?
Is thinking that the law or words like legal are synonymous with moral or just, and that's not the case. I mean, most of our great examples of morality throughout history are people who broke the law.
That reminds me of a scene from the film. Take a look.
There's been a lot of historical influences from civil disobedience that have influenced me, and most of them were preaching nonviolence, and this idea of nonviolence not meaning being soft, kind of a strong, peaceful resistance, and that power that comes through love.
It doesn't start so much with a movement of thinking as a movement of the heart. The young people who saw segregated lunch counters in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960, those 4 students ignited a movement that ultimately involved hundreds and thousands of people, because that movement of the heart touched the hearts of others.
The initial purpose of that revolution has to be a simple one.
The civil rights movement kind of introduced the whole notion of the possibility of making social change happen.
I think that's part of what my generation lacks, is that we haven't had these tangible examples of what it looks like when people take power and are committed to changing the system.
Dr. King said, if I can get 5%, I can change the situation. I only need 5%. It's never a matter of the majority. It's always a matter of conscience, and conscience only operates through an individual.
I was impressed with the statement you made in your hearing, your sentencing hearing. You said, I say this, what you just talked about, the conscience of the community and why you were doing what you were doing. I say this not because I want your mercy, but because I want you to join me. Is there evidence that people are signing up in sufficient numbers for similar acts of civil disobedience to reach some kind of critical mass?
Yeah, I think the numbers that it takes for civil disobedience, if people are actually committed to it, are not overwhelming majority numbers. I mean, for years there have been all these polls that say, only half of Americans are, believe climate change is happening, or only a third of them actually understand what climate change really is. Those sort of polls happen all the time, and they're generally presented in a kind of discouraging way. And I look at that and I say, well, that's plenty. That's that's more than enough. That a third of Americans who might understand this issue, that's 100 million people. That's more than enough to create change in this country, if those people are willing to actually act like they believe it. If these are the people that understand that our children's future is on the line right now, if they're willing to act like that, then we can create the change that we need to.
I start from the supposition that the world is topsy-turvy, that things are all wrong, that the wrong people are in jail and the wrong people are out of jail, that the wrong people are in power and the wrong people are out of power, that the wealth is distributed in this country and the world in such a way as not simply to require small reform, but to require a drastic reallocation of wealth. I start from the supposition that we don't have to say too much about this because all we have to do is think about the state of the world today and realize that things are all upside down. Now, if you don't think, if you just listen to TV and read scholarly things, you actually begin to think that things are not so bad, or that just little things are wrong. But you have to get a little detached and then come back and look at the world, and you are horrified. So we have to start from that supposition that things are really topsy-turvy. And our topic is topsy-turvy, civil disobedience. Now, as soon as you say the topic is civil disobedience, you're saying our problem is civil disobedience. That is not our problem. Our problem is civil obedience. Our problem is the numbers of people all over the world who have obeyed the dictates of the leaders of their government and have gone to war. And millions have been killed because of this obedience. We recognize this for Nazi Germany. We know that the problem there was obedience, that the people obeyed Hitler. People obeyed. That was wrong. They should have challenged, and they should have resisted. And if we were only there, we would have showed them. Even in Stalin's Russia, we can understand that. People are obedient. All these herd-like people. Remember those bad old days when people were exploited by feudalism? Everything was terrible in the Middle Ages. But now we have Western civilization, the rule of law. The rule of law has regularized and maximized the injustice that existed before the rule of law. That is what the rule of law has done. When in all the nations of the world, the rule of law is the darling of the leaders and the plague of the people, we ought to begin to recognize this. We have to transcend these national boundaries in our thinking. Nixon and Brezhnev have much more in common with one another than we have with Nixon. J. Edgar Hoover has far more in common with the head of the Soviet secret police than he has with us. It's the international dedication to law and order that binds the leaders of all countries in a comradely bond. That's why we're always so surprised when they get together. They smile, they shake hands, they smoke cigars. They really like one another, no matter what they say. What we are trying to do, I assume, is really to get back to the principles and aims and spirit of the Declaration of Independence. This spirit is resistance to illegitimate authority and to forces that deprive people of their life and liberty and right to pursue happiness. And therefore, under these conditions, it urges the right to alter or abolish their current form of government, and the stress had been on abolish. But to establish the principles of the Declaration of Independence, we're going to need to go outside the law, to stop obeying the laws that demand killing or that allocate wealth the way it's been done, or that put people in jail for petty technical offenses and keep other people out of jail for enormous crimes. My hope is that this kind of spirit will take place not just in this country, but in other countries, because they all need it. People in all countries need the spirit of disobedience to the state, which is not a metaphysical thing, but a thing of force and wealth. And we need a kind of declaration of interdependence among people in all countries of the world who are striving for the same thing.
Okay, so
Probably identify what the quote was or what he was reading. And that was
right, that of course is Matt Damon, and he was reading from writings by Howard Zinn. I believe it was in the tribute show after Howard Zinn passed away. So, who not only is one of our greatest American historians. He's the author of A People's History of the United States, and many, many writings and many books about history based on history as it relates to working people, not just ruling elites and whatnot. So we were talking about what Gandhi termed civil resistance. He didn't really adopt Henry David Thoreau's term civil disobedience, which means kind of not obeying one's governmental leadership or the government strictly itself. And Brad Werner, in the title of his speech, had mentioned direct action and direct action campaigns. I happened to look up this afternoon what the definition, kind of a wiki definition of direct action campaigns. They said the strategic use of immediately effective acts such as strikes, demonstrations, occupations, or sabotage to achieve a political or social end. Well, one thing that it seems to me that's really happened, or at least become more and more obvious over the last couple of decades, is that our civil governments have become much, much more of an extension of big business. They're not as, if they ever were very separate and disparate, they have become much more incestuous, I would say, together. So it kind of requires a little bit of a different way of thinking, because if you're just resisting, in a civil disobedience format where the civil part of that is resisting your government, but it is a little bit more dynamic now, because if a government is kind of owned by your biggest players, it adds a lot. So I was thinking, a civil disobedience and kind of economic disobedience. A couple of things that 350 Vermont has been working on immediately here is town meeting day resolutions, and Tuesday is town meeting day. It's obviously not really a civil disobedience, but it is in a way a kind of a resistance. You worked on the campaign last year, didn't you, Andy? So how does that stand kind of this year?
Well, I do want to, that was a pretty abrupt transition from civil disobedience to town meeting, but, I do want to say that we have to be working on all fronts. One
and a resistance. I mean, that is a form of resistance. It is
a form of resistance. There's no question about it. And part of the work of resistance is not just doing spectacular things. Even in civil resistance, they're the people who chain themselves to the heavy equipment to keep the pipeline from being built, and they're the people who are making them lunch. And the people who take them to the place where they need to go, the people who support them in the courtroom. They're the people who are doing the education work that has to surround this kind of work. I mean, it's the whole thing of a tree falling in the forest. If nobody hears it, did it really make a sound? If somebody chains themselves to heavy equipment and people don't know what it's about, is it effective?
Or they're not there.
Or they're not there at all. So, one of the things that the town meeting campaign is focused on is not so much just getting resolutions passed against tar sands extraction and transport through Vermont, is having a forum, creating a forum for people to just talk about this. For the first time, some people find out what tar sands is, what this whole question of fossil fuels is, not just going to the gas station and putting gas or diesel in your car or truck. It's actually, where does it come from? Who's it affecting? Who's on the other end of the pipeline? Town meeting resolutions are an opportunity to talk about that with your neighbors, and that's what they're really effective at. Just the way, any kind of civil resistance demands an explanation, demands a publicity, demands people who are getting the message out and explaining what it's all about. So tar sands resolutions, we had 29 towns last year who passed resolutions against transport of tar sands through Vermont. And, you know, none of those towns were in the Northeast Kingdom. This year, the towns the towns that are closest to the pipeline that goes through Vermont have resolutions on their ballot, or they have someone coming to their town meeting, or groups of people, organizers who are coming to their town meeting with a resolution calling for a stop to or for an opposition to tar sands transport through Vermont. And that's happening not just in the Northeast Kingdom, but in other towns like Shelburne, where we all were the other night. A group of elders from Wake Robin are
The Wake Robin Eco Warriors.
Eco Warriors are coming to town meetings,
I
so
love
Shelburne
that.
better watch out.
Yeah.
And so people all over the state are using these resolutions as a way of actually getting the word out. It does make a difference when the resolutions get passed, but it doesn't have any binding effect. It just has a symbolic resonance with people.
And it starts the conversations, like you were saying. I think starting at the very bottom, educating yourself about whatever issue is the most important part, and awareness of the issues is the first part of that. Or you can never be effective. You're completely marginalized if you don't know what the issues are, and you don't know, what direction to take. So yeah, you're correct.
And really, the status quo is like our biggest enemy, and people not knowing or paying attention to where their fuel is coming from, and the very high cost that we are paying. The fossil fuel companies are not paying. So education, is key, just to on this issue and kind of the bigger issue of looking at our lifestyle and being aware that the choices we make in buying and the choices are cars we drive and just our personal habits and everything are affecting the overall picture, and so it's kind of, I think, a big part of the overall goal is to just sort of gradually sort of make people more aware, raise consciousness or whatever, but make people learn more about it, want to pay attention to choices they're making and what they can do in a small level.
Oh yeah. So it's always, if you're applying pressure from the bottom up, which is basically what a grassroots movement is. Grassroots movements are, where if you're going to have a direct action or a civil disobedience action, you almost is always organized by a grassroots organization amongst different groups of people that we would relate, that would be coming from kind of like where we come from. There's been like a fluorescence of recently, over the last couple years, around fossil fuels, around tar sands, and around broader social justice issues, environmental justice, and justice issues in general. Idle No More, being one of those, is very interesting, and I know, and Andy was involved in that, and knows some about that too. Idle No More, it was based with Indigenous people in Canada. Isn't that where it got its inception?
That's where it was started, and my participation in it was just to go to a couple of Idle No More dances that happened here in Vermont. But yeah, it's part of the First Nations resistance that has been happening in Canada for a long time, and the Indigenous resistance that is typified here by the Indigenous Environmental Network that's been active since 1990, fighting a whole range of different injustices that have been perpetrated against First Nations, Native people in the United States and Canada and around the world. But Idle No More was, you used the word fluorescence. I like that. I think that it was this burst of energy that came out last year that was a lot around these oppressive laws, these omnibus laws that were being passed by the Canadian Parliament, C-38, C-45, these laws that were not only stripped protections away from many bodies of water in Canada, but also rescinding treaty rights, because it's the First Nations people, particularly in Canada, who are standing in the way of, bringing it back around full circle, who were standing in the way and have been standing in the way for years of the profit making on tar sands. Because
Right.
they are the ones not only who are affected by the extraction, but they're the ones, like in British Columbia, whose land this transport is primarily happening through.
Right.
And they have been standing in the way against fracking in New Brunswick, against pipelines in British Columbia, against the extraction and the destruction of the earth in Alberta. There's a group in Grassy Narrows, Ontario, that ever since the 70s has been fighting for climate justice and economic justice for their tribe and for the other tribes in that area. It's just been going on. Idle No More was just a burst of energy of people just saying, we will not sit by anymore.
With the latest round of laws that were being passed, basically for the fossil fuels industry.
And led
to-
by women, led by Indigenous women. That
Yeah.
was really important.
Yeah, I mean, what the Harper government in Canada is doing is just, incredibly outrageous. They're basically preventing any restrictions on air pollution and water pollution, that the corporations cannot be stopped. Basically, they're banning any environmental impact that is going to get in the way of development. And of course, Indigenous groups have been being screwed forever since the colonialists arrived. So I find Idle No More to be quite exciting. Taking back their power. They've been resisting forever, but they have so much such a long history of being exploited, being murdered, have their land stolen, and everything else. I just wanted to read one quote. I think this, the Indigenous part of the movement is key, and that's kind of I feel like the foundation of it all. This is from the Oglala Sioux tribe in South Dakota. The Keystone Pipeline is slated, where the route goes through South Dakota. Our laws define our solemn duty and responsibility to our ancestors, to ourselves, and to future generations to protect the lands and waters of our homelands. So, I think that's, that pretty much says it all. It's sort of I consider it solemn duty and responsibility, and if more people can relate to that and start putting their bodies on the line, the better.
Well, the First Nations, I just want to say, that just relating to what you both have said, the First Nations have been leading the way in terms of showing that it's not just, they've done the dances and been in front of Parliament and made certainly people aware of the injustices, but they've also been blocking roads, they've been blocking railways, they've actually been doing things that are not just symbolic, but are actually stopping the movement forward of these injustices. So it's got to be coupled, I think, with not just even the symbolic gestures that we participated in, chaining ourselves to or locking ourselves in front of the White House or sitting down in a restricted zone, but it's got to move to an area of resistance where we're actually keeping them from doing what needs to happen.
Yeah. Now, in the last minute we have here, less than a minute, I want to mention a couple other movements that people can look up. In North Carolina, there's the HK on J, or Historic Thousands on Jones Street movement. called the Moral Mondays movement. I don't have time to explain much about it, but you really need to look that up. Just Google Moral Mondays movement. It's really amazing. I'd love to join.